Take a look at those quotes. Go on. Take a moment, read them, and let them sink in. I've been on the receiving end of them all, and none of them are particularly pleasant. But there's only one that stands out for me. What happened to you? You were such a good F1. 10 words, just 10 words, that's all. 10 words to insult me, to discriminate against me, and to demonstrate misogyny. Strong words, I know, but based on my personal experience, they're words that nevertheless describe this NHS view of the incompatibility of motherhood and a career. Incredulous? Just my hard luck? An isolated incident? Perhaps, but please, reserve your judgment until after you've heard my story. I started CMT in August 2016, and I was pregnant. Heaven forbid, the audacity of it. And to quote, was it planned or did it happen by accident? Those words should never, never be addressed to any expectant parent, let alone in the context of the work environment. So why has it taken me nearly 5 years to tell my story? It hasn't been for the lack of trying, but with each question raised about the veracity of my experience, my self-esteem and my confidence, well, it's dropped a little further. However, if the events of the last week have taught us anything, it's that now is the time to recognise that from challenge comes change, and challenge is what we must set out to do. My experience is not an easy one to hear, and I'm determined that this should not just be a woe is me discussion, not least because there were positive, uplifting moments in that time, glimmers of hope that sparkle like diamonds in the sunshine, illustrating that there is a path to change. Back in 2016, the first hurdle for me to clear was that of informing HR and Occi Health of my pregnancy. A relatively straightforward task, one would have assumed. Surely I, as mother-to-be, had the authority to do just that. Sadly not. It was required to come from the ever infamous but non-existent line manager. I mean, do we even have those as junior doctors? So I went to the next best person, my educational supervisor, and he just promptly refused. And so as it started, it continued on. No risk assessments, despite multiple requests. No advice on maternity certificates. No guidance on how to sort out pay. All in stark contrast to my AHP colleagues who were also pregnant at the same time. Simply, administration, by their lack of support, demonstrated gross disinterest at best. And at worst, they discriminated. Who did guide me through those things? A handful of supportive colleagues. And by handful, what I actually mean is one or two. They gave me helpful advice on when to stop on calls, what forms to complete, and arguably, more importantly, they have continued to support me, which has been invaluable. And without them, I wouldn't have the courage to talk to you today. Sadly, the same cannot be said for all of my colleagues. One refused to allow me to have some water and ward round to ease my morning sickness. True, that's a relatively minor indiscretion in the grand scheme of things, whilst another suggested that I should be ashamed of having a baby. Well, what can I say to that? Except so much for a caring and compassionate profession. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Surely these are all just bad apples in the crop, Solange. How can we change that? And how do you expect us to change that? True, you can't tell people to be nice to one another. But what you can do, and what I expect you to do, is change people's training experience. Life as a trainee is an odd one, let's be honest. We can all recall rotations that we hated and those that we loved. What was the difference between those times? I would suggest it probably has a lot to do with your relationship with your supervisors and your peers. That's certainly why I set out desperate to be an orthopod and then saw the lights and moved to gastroenterology. As a CMT, I'd always considered myself fortunate to have a good relationship with my TPD. He was somebody that I'd known since F1, one of my first consultants, and somebody that I admired as a physician. And truth be told, I still do, even if he can't bring himself to acknowledge me anymore. Perhaps it's that which made it harder when it came to his complete lack of interest and support for me. From a training perspective, I felt as if I was written off, all because I dared to have a baby. My maternity leave return was in 2018, and it was around the time of Dr. Bawagaba being struck off the medical register. A case that raised a number of important issues for us all, but also one that centred on the criminal conviction of a doctor who'd recently returned from maternity leave. I felt unsupported, I felt scared, and I felt unsure about my return. I feared that the same could so easily happen to me. So I did what anyone would do. I requested to go back to a previous rotation for a shadowing period, but I was told that I would jeopardise the training of other trainees. Instead, I was expected to return to an unfamiliar specialty with non-resident registrar on calls and just get on with it. Thankfully, there was someone who listened. My voice was heard, and we came to this mutual agreement, an informal mutual agreement, that I should not do any on-calls for the first month until I'd found my feet. Despite all those initial reservations, that turned out to be a fantastic rotation, but it wasn't always easy. I was driving 4 hours a day. My commitment was questioned because I couldn't attend 8 AM teaching sessions, and my confidence, well, that was ever dwindling. I raised concerns that I was struggling with my portfolio, and rather than being encouraged to form this realistic and achievable action plan, I was met with the words, "What happened to you? You used to be such a good F1." I can still hear those words, and I'm not sure that they will ever leave me. I was made to feel that this was a mountain that I would never scale, and devastatingly, I was so very close to giving up something that I wanted to do since my teens. That constant sense of being made to feel like a headache, a problem trainee, and someone who didn't deserve to be there, well, that damages your self-esteem. And it's taken the last 2 years to nurture it and rebuild it. In sight of such challenges, I completed my CMT with my exams outstanding in 2019. There was a time when I wasn't sure if and how I would get there, but I'm proud of myself for achieving it. And that was through a combination of self-determination, sheer hard work, the unswerving support from my family, and the security blanket offered by just one consultant, just one, believing in me. The comments sadly haven't stopped. Indeed, my first day as Trust Grade Reg, I was introduced as a Reg who'd had women's problems. I'm not sure how I'm now able to deal with these comments any better, but I suppose it's the old adage that once you've hit rock bottom and survived, there are very few things in life that can threaten you. What I do know is that I'm adamant that trainees should not have to go through what I did, because I was lucky. They might not be. They might not come out the other side. So how do I propose that other trainees don't experience the same issues? I think there has to be a shift in culture within the NHS, a shift that accepts that trainees need to be offered support throughout their training, and one that takes into account other commitments they may have. Let us not kid ourselves that these experiences only apply to those that have been on mat leave. I could have easily been a trainee who'd taken out time due to ill health, time to support a family member, or just one that was struggling. That shift has in fact started. The support strategy and the less than full-time champion are there to do just that. But these strategies are only as good as the commitment that's shown by those within the roles. The champions have to be visible. The juniors have to know of their existence, for you can't ask for help that you don't know exists. The champions have to effect a change within the culture of the workplace to ensure that the overarching aims aren't just an aspiration, but become so ingrained in everyday practice that they're the norm. They can be that link between HR, medical staffing, Occy Health. They can be that friendly face, but more importantly, they can be an advocate for the trainee, giving them a voice that they may not otherwise have. A voice? Surely all trainees know that they need to tell people if they're struggling. Yes, they do. It's something that's drilled into you from day one of F1. But just because you know that you should, doesn't mean that you have the confidence to do so. Do I see that as a failure on behalf of the trainees? No. I see that as your failure. You have to encourage and empower your junior colleagues to speak up, to raise their heads above the parapet and say this is wrong. And then once you've done that, you've given them that freedom, you have to sit back and you have to listen. You have to acknowledge what is being said and act accordingly. And I recognise that sometimes that might mean that you have to say something to your fellow consultant colleagues that's unpopular. But you know what? If you don't have that confidence to talk to your peers, how can you expect your juniors? Surely we all have this responsibility to reach down and pull up others as we climb the ladder. Finally, I think we need to look to our other Royal Colleges to see what they have done to support trainees with childcare commitments. We've all seen that I Look Like a Surgeon campaign on Twitter, and as such, I'm sure you're probably going to be shocked when I tell you that I think the surgeons are doing a good job. This campaign is raising awareness. It's acknowledging that there's a problem, something that we don't do in medicine. Our awareness is that of an ostrich who's burying their head in the sand. We say it doesn't happen in my speciality, and so it isn't my problem. Well, let's be clear. It's all of our problems. So let's go back to where I started and those 3 questions I posed at the beginning. Incredulous? No. Just my hard luck? Come on, that should never be the case. An isolated incident? I wish. Just 2 nights ago, a trainee that returned from mat leave 4 months ago texted me and told me her story. She hadn't read what I had written, and I had no idea what she had experienced. But she pretty much word for word wrote what I had. So if you take nothing away from what I've said, I want you to remember these things. These words, they're not acceptable. This behaviour, it has to change. Trainees aren't just numbers in a spreadsheet or policies on bits of paper. Becoming a parent doesn't make you an issue. It doesn't make you hard work. And it certainly does not make you a bad doctor. Please remember that from challenge comes change, and challenge is what you have to do.